Welcome to The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. Here's your host, the biggest record nerd of them all, Nate Goyer.
Well, hey everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to yet another episode 500 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And yes, you'll note I said another episode 500. As a reminder, we are now celebrating our 500th episode for the month of June. And we've had so many artists who were keen and willing to be part of our 500th podcast celebration. We now have several episode 500s to enjoy. 2 weeks ago, we welcomed Mr. Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins on the show. That was incredible. Last week, we were fortunate enough to speak to Mr. Billy F. Gibbons from a little band from Texas called ZZ Top. Damn, he's so cool. You got to listen to that. And today, dear people, is also incredibly special. We are welcoming Mr. Brett Gurewitz of Bad Religion. He's the boss at Epitaph Records, and he's speaking to us today. It is such an honor. I mean, to me, I have always been such a huge fan of Bad Religion. You know, hoovered up everything in the last 30-something years that they put out. The Epitaph label is full of records that I continue to play and enjoy heavy rotation in my house after initially discovering them some time ago. Epitaph to me is just a super trusted label. I would be looking at new music and I would see that gravestone E logo as really a sign of quality I could trust. And I don't think I've ever been disappointed by an Epitaph release. Plus, the words and the message of Epitaph bands like Bad Religion really shaped me as a youth and really helped me gain confidence in critical thinking, seeking truth, and standing up for myself. So again, it was an absolutely huge honor, personally and professionally, to speak to Brett and have him featured on our episode 500 series. So a little background, this interview was conducted in Los Angeles at the Epitaph offices, which is a bit of like a temple for me. Brett and the staff were so accommodating, so kind. I immediately felt like a friend. So please enjoy this conversation. Brett and I talk all about records, rarities, collecting, running the Epitaph label, the early days, making the transformative Bad Religion album Suffer, and what may be next for Epitaph and the industry as a whole. And so I encourage everyone to head over to epitaph.com and grab some records. They've got a lot of new and interesting releases. They've got the new Drain album that's up there for pre-order, so grab one or both of those variants. And of course, they've got a ton of reissues of other stuff, Bad Religion, Rancid, and even All. You guys know where to go, epitaph.com. And just a quick reminder before we get into the interview, please make sure you follow The Vinyl Guide in your podcast app. And that way you automatically get notified when there's new episodes and conversations available. Just as a reminder, all 500 plus podcast episodes are available to listen to anytime. There's no paywall. There's no hoops to jump through. If you want to listen to episode 2 or episode 499, you could do that at any time. They're all out there for your enjoyment. Just again, follow in your podcast app. And if you want to help support your boy Nate here, well, that is appreciated. Join our Patreon page at patreon.com/vinyl guide. And that am that. So, let's jump into the recording room with Mr. Brett Gurewitz at Epitaph Central for another episode 500 of The Vinyl Guide. This week on The Vinyl Guide, we are welcoming to the show Brett Gurewitz, or Mr. Brett.
Well, yeah.
Are you still Mr. Brett?
Two Bad Religion fans, yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
All right. The head honcho of Epitaph, which includes Anti,
And Hellcat.
Quite an operation here.
Burning Heart.
Burning Heart, okay.
Yeah.
And we were just talking beforehand about record collections. You said you were not a record collector, but you used to be one.
Yeah, so, growing up, I collected records, and that was the only format. I started buying records. I guess the first record I ever bought on my own was Cosmo's Factory.
Oh, Creedence.
Yeah.
Okay.
A great record.
Mm-hmm.
And I must have been around 1971.
Yeah.
I was 9-10 years old.
Okay.
At that time. So I'm 63.
Were your parents supportive of your musical adventures?
For sure.
Yeah.
no music background in my family or anything, but my parents listened to music just casually, but I loved music and wanted to buy records as a kid. And I said to my mom, can I buy a record? And she said, yeah, do you know what record you want? And I said, yeah. And then I went to one of the big kids on my block because I was 9 or 10 years old. I said, hey, man, this is one of the cool kids with long hair and smoke weed on my cul-de-sac. What record should I buy? My mom's going to let me buy a record. Get Cosmo's Factory. So that was a good starting point. And so she took me down to Sears and bought Cosmo's Factory. So, and I collected records, probably until I was around, into my early 20s. But what happened at that time was I was going out with a music industry legend, Susie Shaw, one of the owners of the equally legendary Bomp Records. And Susie's ex-husband was Greg Shaw, one of the great record collectors of all time, and really a godfather of the indie rock world. Maybe Bomp might have been one of the first indie labels to ever put out a punk record. And anyway, though, so I was living with her at her house, and Greg Shaw's record collection was so huge that he kept it at her house. And it was a whole room of the house. It was his record collection looked like a record store to me. It was floor to ceiling, and it was all '60s garage. It was very focused. And it was every '60s garage record ever made almost. It was so monumental and very interesting. But he collected them. He sold them. Sometimes collectors would come from around the world. From France, Japan. They'd come to the house. And they'd go through and they'd pick 6 records and buy them, and that would pay the rent for a couple months. Kind of a thing.
So records are coming in and out all the time. Then, yeah.
They're mostly staying in, but when time, it's tough having an indie label, right? So
feast and famine.
When things got tight, they sold a few records, right? Yeah. And there were a lot of rarities in there. But anyway, at that time I had moved in, so I moved my record collection in there. And one thing led to another, and I love her to this day, and I don't know if it's mutual, but we broke up, I got kicked out, and my record collection remained there. So I kind of stopped collecting after that. But I'd love to talk to you about records.
Sure.
And I've made a lot of records. So, yeah.
Are you surprised about the vinyl revival of the last decade and a half?
A little bit, yeah. I've seen it go up and down. When I first started Epitaph, we were only selling vinyl, and I was, shipping vinyl all over the world, out of my little recording studio, out of the closet in the back of my little recording studio called West Beach Recorders, and then that grew and grew and grew, and I guess around 1987, the CD came around, Oh, well, at one point I started selling cassettes with my vinyl, so I'd have to make 2 of everything and make a punk rock album. And we'd if we sold 3,000 albums, we'd sell 750 cassettes, kind of a thing.
The ratios are pretty consistent?
At least in my world, in the sort of the underground punk rock world, that's what it was like. The CD came out, it was controversial, and but I love anything new. And I said, I'm going to put my records on CD. I just did it. When they first came out, I'm sure you remember, they were too expensive.
Yeah.
They were really expensive, and everyone hated them because people were charging a lot, but they cost nothing to make them, And when they first came out also, they sounded like crap because they weren't 16-bit yet, I'm guessing. But, the mastering process wasn't 16-bit.
The way I understand it is a lot of the albums that were put on the CD, they just used the same masters that they used for records.
That's right.
Which kept all the high end, because once you made the record, the groove that would chop off the high end, but on CD it kept that high end, so it sounded very brittly.
Well, yeah, and really what happens with a record is you've got that EQ curve that's in the needle, it's in the cartridge, right? Yeah. Because you can't cut all that bass into the wax, into your mothers, and your lacquers, because if you do, the needle will bounce out, right? So the actual recording in the vinyl is lacking low end, and then the cartridge restores it. And there's, I forgot the name of the curve, but it was like an international standard for the EQ curve.
I think it's an RIAA curve or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but anyway, CDs could hold a lot of bottom, but at first they didn't. So, but anyway, yeah. So then we started selling CDs, and so for a long time I had to make 3 of everything. We're making a CD, a cassette, and an LP for every release. And I can remember as the CD started catching on, records just started getting less and less popular. It's just dwindling. I used to have a warehouse out on San Fernando Road, just full of vinyl and CDs and cassettes. And by some point in the late '90s, the vinyl was just almost gone. Nobody was ordering it, and it was dying, and everyone thought it was the end of vinyl. So, but yeah, it never fell all the way off. It always stayed, 15-25% of the sales were vinyl.
Was there a point where you thought maybe we just don't even focus on this anymore?
Yeah, it was right before COVID. I thought, man, it's sort of falling off the cliff, and when it goes away completely, I don't want to be stuck with a warehouse full of it. You know what I mean? So we're trying to play that guessing game. Sort of musical chairs, where when the music stops, you don't want to be the one standing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when the pandemic hit, and everyone was stuck at home and had no source of entertainment at all other than online shopping.
Yeah.
I mean, vinyl sales bounced back like crazy during COVID. I mean, people, you couldn't make enough records, and I guess, sorry to monologue here, but
no, this is good.
It was interesting because we didn't know if we keep going, if that was just a trend because of people being locked down and doing a lot of online shopping, but it's held on. I mean, vinyl's popular, and it's become popular with kids. That's the most exciting thing. Is my daughter, who's in high school, has a little record player, and she wants records on vinyl. And
that's interesting. The bump for, I guess, Epitaph, the organization, was right before COVID. Leading up to it, there's been, I think from around 2006, 2010, it's been steadily rising. I know there was definitely a ramp up, before and during COVID.
Yeah.
But Epitaph was one of the labels that really didn't seem to give up on vinyl. I mean, even in the nadir of it, 96, 97, records were still coming out when most labels had pretty much cut their losses on it.
No, for sure. And I think because we're an indie label, and really our niche is working with young developing artists or avant-garde left of center artists. We're not dealing in the mainstream. We're always a little left of center of the mainstream, whatever we're doing. And those types of artists, they want to have the vinyl to sell at their show. It's sort of it's just a cool keepsake, and it's a connection between them and their fan, where maybe a fan wants to buy a t-shirt, but if you're only making 1,000 records on a release because it's a small artist, and not a lot of stores are going to order a lot of them, right? Then the artists themselves want them, and they'll take them, and they'll take them on tour, and they'll sell them at their merch booth at the shows. And it's sort of an important part of not only their livelihood, but also, their connection with their fans, because then their fans buy something at the show, they've got the record, they take it home, and it's sort of has some significance.
It's a good thing that it could be signed. It's almost like a format made for Instagram. People like to have their picture with it, but also, like, unlike a t-shirt, you don't have all these different sizes. You don't get stuck with all the smalls and the XXLs at the end of the tour,
Yeah, right. And it's also something that you're not gonna wind up never you're not going to ever wind up regretting getting this. If you love the band and you get their record, that record is going to be something you can have for your life. You know what I mean? And it's just, it becomes, it's like an artifact. You know?
So at this point, does Epitaph for new artists or new releases do exclusives, certain variants of colors, so fans of the band early on can get something even extra special? Is that part of the Epitaph rollout?
That is a big part of it. Of course, we make all of the records on standard black vinyl as well. But for our bigger artists, we'll definitely do lots of color variants. It's very common for us to do 180 gram high fidelity vinyl. For example, I'll just share this. We've not announced the record yet.
This isn't coming out until probably end of May.
Okay, the record will not have been out. So I have a beloved, quite popular artist with a record coming out. I'll tell you off the record.
Fair enough.
And they've just made a phenomenal new album. And it sounded so good, and vinyl is so important to this artist. Even though it only has 11 songs, he said to me, "Hey, man, so that the vinyl can sound amazing, I want to cut this on 2 full-length discs. What do you think?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it'll sound amazing and you'll be able to get it loud, but don't forget your fans are going to have to put on the side of an LP and then get up and flip it over every 3 songs. And on one of the sides, it'll be a side with 2 songs,
Right.
We're not talking Pink Floyd here. These are not 20-minute songs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These are rock songs." So I said, "We'll do it. It'll be a really, really special piece. It's going to have to be expensive, but it'll be amazing, So we love to do those things because our sort of, our main mission in life at Epitaph and Anti is to serve the artist,
right.
And so, but on the other hand, there's some of our artists like, the Architects, who recently had a release. They're a metalcore band. Now they've sort of evolved to just be like a heavy hard rock band, but with metalcore still in their sound. But in the hardcore community, people collect vinyl variants. Right. They don't really care about hi-fi Japanese 180 gram vinyl. So, for example, for them, we'll do a number of vinyl variants. Some will be more limited than others. Some will be exclusive to territories.
Right.
This is the vinyl variant for Germany. This is the UK. This is Belgium, Netherlands, and then the hardcore collectors will buy the bundle with all the vinyl variants in it, which is just an insane thing. But people do it and they enjoy it.
So you sell the bundle in one shot. People can get the Japanese, the American, the European, or do they have to go to the different websites in order from?
No, it's different in every case. But usually, if it's the kind of an artist who knows that their fans are real vinyl collectors, and we'll know that too because we know the people we're working with, then that'll be sort of part of it. Many times we'll say let's make it easier for the collectors. Let's make a bundle that includes all of the variants, including the rarest variants. Obviously, those ones are going to be much too expensive for the casual fan to buy.
Sure.
But for the avid collector who's a completist, then they can go out and get that.
Yeah.
So
because I live in Australia, so I get a lot of people reaching out to me saying, "Can you get me that variant of the particular record?"
Yeah.
I help when I can. It'd be so convenient if there was one place that super fans could buy all of them at once.
No, we do that sometimes.
Oh, that's
not
awesome.
in all cases, And sometimes you can go overboard with the vinyl variants, and you end up with a few of the brown ones, or you end up with some left over in your warehouse, and you never want to do that either. So, But another big part of what we do is we now have been going since the 80s, right? So we have a very deep catalog, and we have lots of beloved catalog albums. So a big part of what we do around here is reissue classic punk albums, And when we do that, whether it's for an anniversary or to memorialize something, or maybe it's just been out of print too long, we'll always come out with the standard black, so someone who just wants to buy it because he never heard the record or just want to have it, they can afford it at a normal price. But we'll always put like the collector's edition, so I have at least one cool collectible variant.
Right.
You know?
Okay.
You know.
Epitaph doesn't seem to have as many box sets. A lot of labels are doing box sets like a celebration of, Velvet Underground or some Iggy album or something.
Yeah.
But something like, for example, Bad Religion Suffer.
Yeah.
Or something like that. There hasn't been like a box set of that. Has there been consideration or discussion about those sort of things?
So there is a Bad Religion box set, but it's
The
sold
10
out.
one, okay.
Yeah, so that was
That's
sold
one.
out. We could do it again. We've done some really beautiful box sets. We did a box set called Tom Waits Orphans, which was songs that were either unreleased or overlooked or didn't have a home, and did very well all around the world. We've done a Bad Religion box set. We've done an NoFX box set. But I will say, my production person, Rhonda, who's been with me for over 30 years, does a phenomenal job at it, but it's a heavy lift. It takes a lot of meticulous research and work. Goes into the materials. These boxes are always custom. You've got 10 times more work, 10, maybe 100 times more work. So, yeah, we can't do a lot of them because we're a small company.
Okay.
But yeah, I do love doing them.
I like in the Bad Religion box set, there was room for like 3 more albums.
Yeah,
which I think you guys are now full. You're ready for the next box set.
No, I think we can do another box set now for sure.
Yeah.
I think, in fact, I'm writing songs now for our next record, and so is Greg, so hopefully.
Oh, okay.
Can you believe we have 17 studio albums so far?
I can.
I can't.
That shelf at my home is sagging a bit. I'm always happy to add another.
Cool. So we do those, but they're expensive. They're heavy lift. It's not, it has to be special. Yeah.
What do you think is the future? Like, if we sit here 5 years from now, maybe even 10. Where do you think the physical formats will be?
That is a really good question. I don't know, because I've always been interested in the intersection of art and technology, and the music business is the sort of the perfect place that sits right at that intersection. If you look at it, technology, people think of streaming as technology, but really a vinyl record is a technology. I think Thomas Edison invented it, right? And then it was a pain in the ass because you only had singles, right, at the birth of rock and roll. So if you wanted to listen to 30 minutes of music, you'd have to stack all those singles on your record player, right? So someone invented the LP, which was a new technology, right? You'd have to invent a lathe that could make something that big and all kinds of stuff, right? And that drove business and made the music business bigger, right? And then someone invented the cassette, which wasn't invented for music. It was invented for like business memos, for voice, right? Which is why cassettes sound shitty, youngsters who like them.
Yeah.
But anyway, they are cute, but they sound like crap.
Yeah.
But that really was a huge shot in the arm to the music business too, because suddenly you could sell all the records to customers on a new format, and GM started making cars with cassette players in them, so people had a reason. Now people could listen to music in their car. They didn't, you couldn't listen to a record in your car, so that made music more popular. And then the CD, and hey, they sounded like shit, but they don't skip,
Right?
right? They can't, they don't. You can scratch them. We used to think that they wouldn't get scratched. They do, but for the most part, it holds a lot, holds hours where a record doesn't, right? So
went from 40 minutes on a record to 78 on a CD or something.
yeah. So suddenly everyone in the world is buying Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon again. They bought it now for the third time on vinyl and cassette, and now they bought it on CD, and whatever label owns that record is thrilled, right? And then streaming, right? And streaming made music even more accessible for everybody. Now you have, well, actually, I'm skipping Steve Jobs and what he did for it, right? With iTunes.
Digital sales.
Yeah,
and stuff like
digital,
that,
right? And so suddenly everybody almost everybody in the world, because just about everyone in the world has a smartphone now, has every song that's ever been recorded in their pocket. So, the history of the music business and actually people's relationship with music has always been driven by technology and invention, right? And so I'm not sure, but I do love streaming. I love the convenience and how we can, if I can think of a song, for the most part, I can be listening to it in 10 seconds. But physical formats are really important too, and have advantages over streaming. And I don't know. I mean, I don't think that vinyl's the end of the story. I would not be surprised at all if somebody invents a physical format that nobody's ever thought of, and that's really exciting and people like. So I would love for that to happen. But short of that, I think it's safe to say that vinyl is, even though it's basically an antique technology.
It's over 100 years.
Yeah. Thomas Edison did invent it, and they're not substantively different from what he invented. It's just incrementally improved. But so I figure something that's been around for 100 years is going to be around for 100 more years. People like it. You know what I mean? It's like it's hard to improve on sliced bread too. I think no matter how advanced AI becomes, people are going to want to eat sliced bread. It's just a good thing. It has lots of good stuff about it, and people like it. So I don't know. I guess the short answer to your question is I think vinyl is going to be here forever, and it'll have its place alongside other technologies. But I wouldn't be surprised, and I'd be excited to see if another kind of physical format ever was invented.
I'd like to see. I guess one of my theories about what could happen to it is 3D printing. More and more 3D printers in the house. Rather than ship one of these records, sell the file that people can then create their own in their house.
I love it. I'm a sci-fi buff. There was this book by Neil Stephenson called Diamond Age, where everybody has a nanotech 3D printer in their house. So you don't go to the store anymore to buy, let's say you want to buy a thermal sweater or something.
Right.
You just, you pop the code in and it comes out of the wall.
Yeah. Like the Jetsons.
Yeah. It takes the carbon atoms out of the air and makes something for you.
Yeah.
But that'll be our post-money utopian society when that happens.
Oh, is that coming? I see a different future ahead of us.
Well, yeah.
I hope you're right.
Well, all those futures are there in the multiverse. Let's hope we go into the right one.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the rare records of your career. Probably starting with the very first one, the very first Bad Religion.
Okay, yeah.
That 7-inch.
Yeah.
Now, what gave you the idea to be able to create the 7-inch by yourself? And also noting that there's a lot of, at that time, there were other labels around. There was Bump, as you said.
Yeah, there's Bump,
SST. There were a few other labels. Did you guys consider or work with any of those labels beforehand, or did you go straight into let's do it ourselves?
Yeah. So first of all, let's put it in context. I was 17, so I was in my second year of high school, and Greg and Jay were 15. We were just little kids. You know what I mean? And
their voices are just barely changing at that point.
Yeah, Greg's voice changed after How Could Hell Be Any Worse? Because he had his tonsils out and it's got but he always had good pitch. But so I had no awareness of what a label was. You know what I'm saying? All I knew about the music business is that I bought records and I liked rock bands. I didn't know what it meant that there was a label written on the back of the record. And so it was a very early, it was a very beginning of the LA hardcore scene, because it was 1980 when we got together. Punk rock probably started in LA at around 78 with like the Screamers and the Weirdos. We were playing shows, and punk bands sometimes were on labels, right? There was, in the LA hardcore scene, the labels were sort of SST, Posh Boy, Frontier.
Slash.
Yeah, Slash, for sure. But there were also other bands in the scene who were just making their own 7-inch, because there were pressing plants in LA. And it didn't occur to me that a label could like you and make your record for you. It's just never even thought of it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And my dad was an entrepreneur. He had a business that he was doing out of our garage. And his dad was an entrepreneur. And I've come from a culture of that. And I don't know. I just said, hey, Dad, I want to make a 7-inch for my band. And he was so stoked to hear me say that, right? He was like, oh, my God, my son's going to be an entrepreneur like me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he wanted to support me in that. So, he lent me $1,500. And, like I looked in the yellow pages for, record pressing. I found a place called Alberti. It was like this old Italian, it's just a little place downtown. I called them and I said, well, how do I do it? And they said, well, you have to get a recording on tape. You bring it to us and it'll cost this much. So, and then, I had a friend named Johnette. And Johnette later went on to be in a band called Concrete Blonde.
Oh, Napolitano.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Johnette was going out with this guy, Jim Mankey, whose brother Earl Mankey was in Sparks. And Jim played in Sparks, and like the very early Sparks too, but Jim was a recording engineer. And Johnette worked at a legendary LA studio called Gold Star, where the Beach Boys worked, and Phil Spector, legendary place. In fact, their chamber at Gold Star was, that was a legendary chamber reverb that Phil Spector used to use for the Wall of Sound and things like that when he was in LA. So anyway, though, Johnette, they did mastering at Gold Star, and Johnette was a receptionist. And she said, you should use my boyfriend Jim and let him record you. And we'll master it here. And so I got advice from people. And actually, that's to do with the first LP, How Could It Help You Any Worse?
Okay.
That's what Jim did. The very first EP, I just looked in Music Connection. And I found an ad for a recording studio, and I went in the yellow pages and I found Alberti. But when I had to get it mastered, that's when I met Johnette.
So did you have any conversations? Because like Greg Ginn was around the scene. I mean, how did you do this? Or were you able to seek advice? Or
not yet. Like at that very early time, like we were like the young kids in the scene. Greg Ginn was an older kid, you know what I mean? And Black Flag were already like, to us, they were like rock stars. They were playing big shows. And so, yeah, it was literally just resourcefulness for the first 7-inch. But then I was able to make one, and Rodney on the Rock had a local radio show at midnight where he played punk rock 7-inches from around the world. And he actually played our cassette on the radio before we got it made into a 7-inch. So we started getting, and kids used to record that show. So we started getting known in LA, and we started playing shows. And so when we recorded the 7-inch and I pressed it, basically, I would go around to record stores and just put some in there. I asked them if I could put them in on consignment. And only punk record stores would sell the stuff back then. It wasn't, and what I mean by punk record store, there wasn't enough punk rock in the world for there to be a punk store, but stores that sold imports.
Yeah. Punk friendly.
Yeah. Non-chain stores usually had a section for punk and for imports. And punk was usually near the imports. So I'd ask them if they had a consignment, if I could put this in consignment in their punk section. And there were a few stores that had punk sections. There was Zed Records in Long Beach. There was Moby Disc in the San Fernando Valley. There was Middle Earth Records. I think it was in Orange County somewhere. And I'd drive there. I'd put 5 7-inches in there. And then I'd come back the next week and they were gone, and they'd buy more. And they kept having it. Just no matter how many I gave them, they sold out. So kids were loving our 7-inch. And I started getting fan letters like from Italy and from Netherlands, from Germany.
Wow, how did they get out that far? Do you know? Any idea?
No, I think the record stores might have had like, where you could do mail order from the record stores.
Right.
I wasn't shipping them, but I did get a PO box for Epitaph Records. It wasn't even a company,
Right.
But it was a PO box, and so I would go to the PO box, and we were getting fan mail, and that's the 7-inch got reviewed by in the LA Times by notable music writers saying it was good. So it was really shocking, and I didn't even take it seriously. I thought, I mean, it must be. It's not that we're good. It must be that it's so rare for anyone to make a record that if you just do it, you'll get attention for it.
Okay.
I mean, and then we got, and the record really resonated in Europe. And I think maybe because the logo was so memorable.
They're a bit more sympathetic to, I guess, free non-religion thinking.
Yeah. And yeah, especially in some of those like those Catholic countries where they've been, but I was getting an unusual, I was getting a surprising amount of fan mail, like 20 letters from Italy, 20 letters from Amsterdam, from Berlin, and I thought it just must be that there are 20 people there that like to write letters and buy everything. I didn't think it's like nobody ever writes, so this must mean we're big there,
Right.
But anyway, though, another funny thing about that, there are several versions of the song "Bad Religion," which is our theme song or whatever. It was, I think, the first song I ever wrote for the band. But the reason for that is I was so inexperienced. I didn't realize that if you wanted to press a record again, you could just use the same recording.
Oh, so we recorded the song.
We recorded it again, So now there's the 7-inch is out there, and there's a couple versions of it. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
The first pressing sounds different than the second pressing. Which
I'll go you one further. When I was a little kid, I'm in single digits, I thought that each record had to be recorded individually. So the artist had to re-record the song for the record I had, and the next one,
yeah.
And I had a copy, Stevie Wonder, "Boogie On Reggae Woman."
Yeah,
in the
I
middle,
had that.
Yeah, in the middle section, he's like, I thought I had a rare record because someone got in a fight during that song. He's like, let me play. Oh, I thought they were battling.
Yeah.
So okay. So on that single, are there a few different, like first press sounds different than the second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's the first and the second, and then there was a comp.
Public service.
Yeah, public service. Where they asked us if they put like a song, one or two of our songs from the 7-inch on there.
Right.
And I said, yeah, but I didn't know I could just send them the tape, so I recorded it again for them. So they're different versions,
Oh, far out. So as I understand,
but I've learned that now. We don't do that anymore.
You don't do that anymore?
No.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Glad to see we're progressing.
Yeah.
So that first 7-inch, as I understand, there was an initial press that had a skipping error.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Because from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong or I'm going a bit nerdy here, the first 500 had a skipping error, and then they had to repress it.
Yeah.
And all those skipping error ones, what happened? Any idea what
those,
happened?
those ones are the same recording. That's not different.
Okay.
Yeah. They're just out there in the world somewhere. You can tell because the engraving on the inner groove is different on the
first 500 than the...
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. One of them, that was during the time when Lex Valenza was leading the Solidarity movement in
Poland?
In Poland. And we wrote Solidarność on the inner groove, and we wrote on one of them. And then on one of them we wrote "We're Not Bad Religion" on one side, and we wrote "You Are" on the other side.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not a historian, so I don't really remember which is which, but we can just consult ChatGPT after this.
I know a few people who could, because I've had conversations, and these are the sort of record nerd conversations I have about the differences between those two. So what you're saying, because the more popular one is the "We Are Not Bad Religion." So if people look at their run out groove and it says
Solidarność,
then that's probably one of the first 500.
Yeah,
I would imagine. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Alberti just said, okay, well, they repressed those 500.
No, I don't think they said okay or bad. It wasn't like I didn't even know what a test pressing was. I think I just made more. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, pretty quickly, you were bringing on other bands, so it wasn't just a Bad Religion run label.
It
right?
wasn't that quick. So I made the 7-inch for the band, and then not long after that, we did How Could Hell Be Any Worse, which I told a little bit of the story of already, where I
Jeanette Napolitano.
yeah,
and
Jeanette
mastering.
introduced me to Jim. He engineered it at Track Record, their original location on Melrose. We recorded between midnight and 6 in the morning because they gave us that slot for like $300,
Right.
because no one was there. You know? And we did it over 3 nights from midnight to 6 in the morning.
Right.
So, and then not too long after How Could Hell Be Any Worse, Jay, our bass player, Jay Bentley, said, hey, the Vandals would like to know if you would make a record for them on Epitaph. And so I said, yeah. So we did the Vandals' first EP, which is a 12-inch, was it 12? I think it was a 12-inch EP called Peace Through Vandalism, produced by the great Tom Wilson, who's no longer with us. And you can hear my background vocals on Anarchy Burger. I'm helping them scream, hold the government. Yeah.
Okay.
But that, the Vandals was really the only other group I put out for a long time.
Okay.
And then we put out the ill-fated record called Into the Unknown, which was sort of a curveball. Everybody always asks me, what were you guys thinking? For the listeners not acquainted with this, it's kind of a prog record. It's not punk. I don't know what we were thinking other than to say, like, we weren't really thinking anything. Like, Greg and I were prog heads before we went punk. For the listeners at home, there's air quotes around went punk. But that, that's what you do back then.
Right.
It was like a commitment. But, Greg and I, we were listening to Crimson, Yes, ELP, and those groups were sort of the weird avant-garde groups. I won't say they were punk, but they weren't mainstream music. And so that's sort of something we had in common. But you couldn't really like those bands. We knew that. Like, it wasn't kind of acceptable in the punk scene to like prog. But we did. And then, even though things were going great, like Bad Religion was getting popular, we're like playing big shows, big rooms, fans loved the records. We wrote our next record. I don't want to sound like I'm blaming it on Greg, but he brought the first song in for the record, and it was like a prog song. We'd got a keyboard, which back then was a no-no for a punk band. So maybe I'll blame this on Jack Grisham, but TSOL had a keyboard, right?
Okay.
They were one of our peers in the punk scene and in the LA hardcore scene. They got a keyboard. They were kind of, and they had keyboard on their new record, but it wasn't prog. It was post-punk,
right.
And it was dark post-punk, right? Nowadays you might call it dark wave or whatever, but it was a normal progression. And because TSOL had a keyboard, I got a keyboard for the band. And Greg plays piano better than me. So, and Greg had always written some of our songs on piano, like that song, Fuck Armageddon, This Is Hell, starts with a little, like, a melodic guitar line. He wrote that on piano. He wrote the song on piano so he could teach it to us, and we play it on guitar, right? So I knew he was a piano player, so I said, hey, here's a keyboard. We can maybe use this in the band. TSOL's doing that stuff. And other punk bands are starting to do it. I think PIL, was the Pistols had broken up. PIL was bringing in more atmospheric shit. But when Greg came to rehearsal with his first song of what he's working on, it sounded prog, right? It didn't sound like post-punk at all. But I like prog. So then I wrote a song like that.
Right.
And so we wrote a bunch of songs like that. Literally never even had any discussion about it. It was just, we're just kind of being teenagers, you know what I mean? And the other guys in the band were sort of like, I think they were sort of skeptical the whole time, to the point where, like, and I hired Tom Wilson, who's like the best punk rock producer in LA. He had done the Adolescence Blue album, and he'd done TSOL's stuff. I hired him, and he was kind of skeptical too. He's like, this is your stuff? And you're like, yeah, this is it, And in the middle of that session, Jay quit.
Yeah.
He's like, this isn't punk. Fuck this. And me and Greg are like, whatever, we'll do what we want.
Right.
But anyway, so that record, we made it, we put it out. I think I've told the story like this before, but we shipped 10,000, which back then was a lot for an underground punk band. I think we got around 11,000 returns. So I don't know how that works, but nobody kept
3D printers. That's what it was.
Nobody wanted that record in the world. Like it was like a Spinal Tap moment, like the 2-word review, shit sandwich. So anyway,
because tens of thousands of people bought How Could Hell Be Any Worse?
Yes.
So then when they see
Into
the Unknown,
they all bought Into the Unknown.
They're all, oh yeah, they took it home and heard something very different.
I don't know if they said, oh yeah, their first surprise might have been the album cover that showed outer space.
Right.
They might have been like, well, I'm sure this is ironic.
Sure.
Let's just give it a listen. It's like, whoa. So anyway, lesson learned. We learned a lesson early.
So all those records came back. You got a ton of records back. Big money loser, because up to this point, the single did well.
Yeah.
The How Could Hell Be Any Worse did phenomenal.
Yeah, the Vandals did great. Yeah.
The Vandals did great, and now this was kind of probably the first flop of Epitaph.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
But Epitaph wasn't a business. It was just me. I wasn't living at my mom's house anymore, but I was for the first 2 records, So I went out and I got a square job at a place called Sounds Good Music Imports as a salesman, selling high energy gay disco. And I took that because that's the job opening they had. I was selling records to stores that it's a genre that record stores sell a lot of that stuff, and especially back in the early '80s, it was this huge underground scene for these it's not a euphemism to call it gay disco. It was like an exclusively gay scene, and it was high energy disco. It was like a
lot of 12-inch records, kind of
all
for
12
the DJs.
all 12-inch records,
right.
And Sounds Good. What they used to do is, because everything was vinyl back then, and there would always be a currency difference between the U.S. and the U.K., right? And because the records were so much more expensive in the U.K., it pretty much prevented UK labels from exporting their records to the US. However, if there was a record that was coming out, the US, because their records were so much so much more affordable, right? They would delay their release date, or maybe what it was is that the UK would jump the US street date, right? So that people wanted it, they had to pay the higher price, if they wanted it early. So Sounds Good's whole game was they would import records from the UK, and there'd be like 2 weeks before the US release date where we could sell it at the import record stores for way more money. But but people who wanted it could have the new Madonna record or the new Bronski Beat record 2 weeks before anyone else. They could play it in their club, and they could play, whatever. So that was my job. I called record stores all around the country. Hey, I've got this new record coming out. Do you want to order some? I was terrible at it. I'm not a salesman. I hate selling, but I needed a job. So I was working there, and I said to my boss, hey man, I had this record company called Epitaph, and what if you distributed me, and I could keep working here, but if I sign a band, you could give me the money to press it, and you'd be the distributor.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was called a P&D deal, pressing and distribution. So Epitaph then became a P&D through this place where I had a job called Sounds Good, and I did that for a few years. I did that until about 1987. So at that time, I put out some records that might be pretty collectible now that people might not even know is on Epitaph. But I was putting out some 60s garage stuff because I was recording a lot of stuff for Greg Shaw at Bomp.
Okay.
And so I recorded like the Primates and the Things and the Morlocks and
okay.
really like garagey. 60s garage, kind of in the
Right.
vein of like Nuggets, those Pebbles. and those
So
kind
you
of,
were recording them. Was this through? Did West Beach exist at this point?
So that was the genesis of West Beach. So
Okay.
what had happened was when I went and got the job at Sounds Good, right? Mm-hmm. After Into the Unknown was a big flop, I said, okay, this isn't working out for me. I need to get a job.
Right,
I
right,
had dropped
right.
out of school already.
Right.
So I got a job during the day, and I was going to night school.
Okay.
And the night school I was going to was called the University of Sound Arts. It no longer exists. But I learned to be, it's one of those places where they teach you to be a recording engineer.
Sound Arts. That's Spot's studio. Was that Sound Arts?
Well, no, this place was USA, the University of Sound Arts.
Okay,
It was,
all right.
It was
Okay.
like upstairs in some building in Hollywood. It wasn't, they didn't even have a studio. But
Okay.
as part of the curriculum, they taught us how to
Concepts
record, and
and
they'd
stuff.
take us to studios
Okay.
where we'd do exercises and get some practical training.
Got
But I learned how to record. And then me and my friend John Girdler started up West Beach,
Mm-hmm.
which was basically like a little room. It was like the back closet of another studio called Pacifica. That was a 16-track place, cheap, like a demo studio
Mm-hmm.
out in on Venice and Los Angeles Boulevard. And we started doing West Beach in there. So I was doing West Beach, working at Sounds Good, and going to school at night. I know it sounds insane, but when you're young, you can do a lot of
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
stuff.
of course.
So I was recording bands. I was putting them out through Sounds Good. And I really dug recording, and I was just recording a lot. I think a lot of it was actually fueled by cocaine because I wasn't sleeping. I would work at Sounds Good all day, and I would record all night, and then I would go to work.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it was like that. And that's, for those of you who weren't alive in the 80s, that's how the 80s were. Like, cocaine wasn't addictive in the 80s. Like, if you didn't do it, you were weird. Around that time, that's when West Beach started.
Right.
So I was doing Sounds Good, West Beach, and Epitaph. And then, what ended up happening is I quit Sounds Good, and I started just doing West Beach. And then as soon as my term ended with Sounds Good, I decided I'm going to put out records out of the back of West Beach now, because now I'm good at recording, and I can do the recording and put the records out. And so I was mostly recording other bands. I was recording, it used to be that I would record a local band. I would charge them, $150 for 10 hours, and that included me and the studio.
Right. Okay.
So that's,
Yeah.
So I was working, I was.
It was a grind.
Yeah, I was working 80, 90-hour weeks. But there were a lot of bands who could come up with $150. So I was recording art rock bands, noise bands, punk bands, garage bands, jazz bands, country bands. It was, it was a wonderful learning experience. I loved recording. I still do to this day. Just aligning tape machines and tweaking compressors and microphone preamps. Like heaven. But a terrible career, because it's like, it's just at $15 an hour, you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, it was really, really hard to make ends meet. But I was enjoying it. I was loving it. And I probably spent 10,000 hours as a recording engineer.
Yeah, it built up that muscle in you and gave you all that experience. That's education by itself, right?
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly.
Masterclass.
Yeah, and for writing too, because I heard all these bands and all their music and all the varieties of music and ways of arranging and approaching music. So then, that takes us to around 87, 88, and the first records I put out, apart from Sounds Good, out of the P&D deal, that's what I look at as the actual official start of Epitaph as we know it today.
Okay.
Because I was working my fingers to the bone as a recording engineer, and I loved it, but I couldn't get more than half a month's rent in the bank ever. And so I said, this has got to be something better than this. I'm going to try putting out records again. So I just started putting records out from using my recording studio as the home base for Epitaph.
Right.
And the first record I put out was a L7's debut album.
Okay.
And then Bad Religion, Suffer.
Well, Back to the Known was just prior to that, right?
I did that when I was at Sounds Good. So that came out under that P&D
Okay,
deal.
got it. Okay, all right.
Yeah. And I did record that, but that was before I had gone to school for it, so I didn't know how to record yet.
Okay.
If you listen to the sound quality between Back to the Known and Suffer,
right,
you'll see that learning curve. You'll see how I
we'll blame that one on Jack Grisham too. That's fine.
I love it. Just kidding, Jack. Jack can beat almost anybody up, so you got to be careful.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. And then L7 came out of that West Beach, those early West Beach recordings. Then Bad Religion, Suffer, and then we did my friend's band, The Little Kings, which very rare record, but they sounded like a cross between the Cramps and AC/DC.
Ooh, okay.
Really cool album art by this local artist named Mark Rude. My dear friend, who I'm still friendly with from The Little Kings, is Gore Verbinski, who went on to be a Hollywood producer of all the Ring, the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Really?
So he went on to be very successful.
Okay.
And then from there, Bad Religion, Suffer was a phenomenon. It sounded good because I knew how to record by then. I mastered it at Capitol Records with Eddie Schreier. This is before he had his place called Future Disc. And he went from Capitol Records to Future Disc mastering to Oasis, which was his place. But he was great at cutting vinyl, and he had a little room at the Capitol Records, in the Capitol Records basement. And I remember going to him with my tape. It was a 1/4-inch, 30 IPS, and saying like, "Oh man, can you make it sound good?" I mean, I was really uptight about it. I never thought I was any good at anything, and I always thought my records didn't sound as good as other records, which makes me push myself. And Eddie said, "Man, this is a great recording. This record sounds really good. You don't have to worry about anything." I was like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah, listen to that. This sounds good. I don't hardly have to do anything." And it gave me so much confidence to go to like a real mastering guy at Capitol Records and have him tell me it sounded good. And then that panned out. The record was really a phenomenon. And what it did was it didn't just put Epitaph on the map, but it put West Beach on the map. Because punk records, at least in the LA hardcore scene, at that time, just never sounded any good. They always sounded thin and crappy. And when Suffer came out, it sounded pretty good. And everyone started coming to West Beach, like, "Oh man,
we want our record to sound
there."
like that.
Yeah. And so suddenly, West Beach is totally booked up, and it was sort of the coolest and best punk bands were coming there. So then, one of them came in. It was NoFX, and I'm like, "Man, you guys are good. You want to be on Epitaph?" So I signed NoFX, and one of them was The Offspring, So I didn't sign them the first time, but the second time around, I signed them.
So you kind of had your pick of the litter.
Yeah, they were because Bad Religion, Suffer was sort of this beacon that said to everybody, "Hey, get a good sound over here," and they came over, and so the Suffer album attracted people to West Beach, which gave me an opportunity to have, make relationships with people and sign them to Epitaph, and so the first 4 or 5 records I signed became iconic California punk bands. It was like
But it wasn't just the sound of Suffer. I mean, the songwriting, the messaging, the through line, the harmonies.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I mean, that was it's still a wonderful package. I'd love to see a box set of Suffer with demos and the story one day. I mean, that would be. I'll just plant that seed. But Suffer is I think one of the high water marks of punk, and it also just kind of started shaping records that came after it.
Thank you. Yeah.
As you were recording Suffer, did you recognize that, this is really different and really interesting?
I wouldn't put it that way, but when you make records, sometimes you have these moments of clarity where you realize, you just get a glimpse that what's happening might be important. Do you know what I mean? And we recorded Suffer in 7 days. That's how we used to make records. We would, the first day we got in there at 12, and we would work until 1 in the morning. And then the next day we'd get in there at 1, and we worked until 3 in the morning. So the next day we'd get there at 3 p.m., and we started working, and then we'd work till 7 a.m. You know what I mean? So it gets late to the point where by the end of Suffer, we're just recording, and when we leave the studio, it was light out. Right. We'd go home, sleep for a few hours, and come back before the day was over. So, so it was almost too fast to know what we were doing. But I will say, once we finished the recording, and I put all the mixes on a cassette, and shortly after that, like a couple of days after, we had a show in Tijuana, this legendary place called Iguanas. And I was driving there with Jay. And Jay was in the passenger seat, and on the way home from Iguanas, we popped Suffer in on cassette. And you know how cassettes were, you get side 1, and then it would flip and play side 2. It was like a continuous thing. And we had a moment on that drive, because it was like a long drive. We didn't feel like talking. And we just listened to the thing we had just made. And we'd made it so fast, so we didn't really have much time to think about it. But we had this oh fuck moment where we just looked at each other and thought, like, what the fuck did we just make? Is this is this as good as, it's like almost like afraid to say it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we had this almost like meta experience where you when you make music, it's very strange, because sometimes you just feel like the instrument and the music's coming through you. But it's very rare. At rare times, you can sort of transcend self and look at yourself making it, and it feels like it's not you. Do you see what I mean? Like you can sort of see and be grateful that this thing just happened, and not even feel responsible for it, but just be fucking grateful. You know what I mean? And it was one of those moments. It was like, but at the same time, you don't know. So we just, yes.
You want to be a realist too. But did you guys frequently do harmonies together? Because that's kind of the first time you guys really pulled you, Greg, and Jay, right? The oohs and ahs.
Yeah. We had done it before, so we had background, but we were heavily influenced by the Adolescents, who famously have sort of Beach Boys style California harmonies on Amoeba and many of not all their songs,
right?
But on a couple of them. And so on How Could Hell Be Any Worse, we experimented with that on. We had some harmonies at the end of Fuck Armageddon, This Is Hell, White Trash, Second Generation, American Dream. I think has a little bit. You know what I mean? But we're California kids, right? And we grew up on the Beach Boys and the Eagles. As punk as we were, you cannot grow up in California without being saturated in beautiful harmonies.
Yeah. No, but look, I grew up in California. I was surrounded by that, but I'd never tried them. You guys were actually trying these, doing these, and executing them really well.
Right. And so, and I also, one of my favorite artists ever, as a kid, my first love was Elton John, his early records. The second album I ever bought was Honky Chateau. His that Elton John band with Nigel Olsson, Dee Murray, and Dave Johnstone, who did all the harmonies. I think they're one of the most undernoted, vocal arrangers, vocal groups. Because they're not. You think of the great vocal groups, you might think of the Bee Gees or the Beach Boys, but really that Elton John band, Elton John used to give them the track, and they wrote those harmonies and sang them. And so I grew up on that stuff. And so it was in our blood. Greg sang in choir as a kid. It was in his blood. And we just tried it. It was like, but I think really what it was is we had the influence of our upbringing, but then we also had the influence of the Adolescents. And we were trying to be as good as the Adolescents at punk harmonies.
So look, Brett, you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate that. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to get your thoughts on the secret sauce that has helped propel Epitaph to this day. With so many labels kind of coming and going, and sometimes they lose sight, Epitaph just seems to continue to go strength to strength, to reach out to new generations, get new fans, get new people on board.
Yeah.
What do you credit that to?
There's something that the Buddhists call beginner's mind, right? And what that means is just never be an expert. Never be too sure.
Always be curious.
Always be curious. Always be open, right? I'll say, as a mission for the company, our North Star for the company was, we don't make records. The bands make records. Our product is the help we give them, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's always kept Epitaph on track. But in terms of always being able to connect with whatever the exciting new music is, beginner's mind. You have to keep a young mind. You have to have that mind you had when you were 17 and you heard something fresh and you went, this is good. Mm-hmm. Because what tends to happen is, as you get older, you tend to think only the shit that you liked when you were 17 is good.
You calcify.
And you can't do that. You have to break through that calcium, and you have to, and if there's something happening that you don't understand, you can't be quick to say it's no good. It's your job to figure out what's good about it. Because if it's happening, that means it's good to somebody. Mm-hmm. And if you can't figure out what that is, then you're missing something.
Besides the music, what do you look for when you bring on an artist into Epitaph? Their ability to connect with fans. Is there any? What are the other non-musical, non-recorded attributes?
I look for authenticity. Mm-hmm. It has to be real, and more often than not, that comes with youth, right? Mm-hmm. These kids are never faking. Mm-hmm. If a kid picks up a guitar and he's 17 years old and he plays the nastiest, stankiest blues rock you've ever heard, that's fucking coming from him. He's only 17. He's been on the planet this long. There's no reason on God's green earth he should be able to do that. Okay. If a 45-year-old comes in here and does that, I just got to think, well, you should be able to do that by the time you're 45. It's not rocket science. Who cares? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm looking for that miracle. I'm looking for that rock and roll swag that comes out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Any albums that are coming out that you're particularly proud of? You're excited, and maybe things that we can share with the audience to keep an eye out for?
You just said, you told me you live in Australia. Mm-hmm. We just announced that we signed the Beths from New Zealand, which is not that far from Australia.
A little far east, but
yeah. I mean, you can't walk there. But
no, yet.
But their new album is called Metal, and it's really, really exciting. Mm-hmm. That's coming out on our sister label Anti. Mm-hmm. And we have an album dropping very, very soon by a young group out of Memphis called Sleep Theory. And they're like a heavy rock group that we're very proud of. We've seen astronomical growth with them lately, mm-hmm. and they're blowing up on radio around the world, and it's exciting to see it because they're a hardworking group.
Okay, good. Well, again, Brett, thank you so much for your time, man. And I personally want to thank you for helping shape my brain over the last 30 years.
Oh, man, I didn't realize that you're so knowledgeable about my band. I really do appreciate that.
Oh, well, it's been a huge fan. It's a huge honor to have you on the show. And thank you for sharing and being open and everything.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Well, there he is, Mr. Boss Man Brett Gurewitz, or Mr. Brett for Bad Religion fans. And again, a huge thanks to Brett and the whole Epitaph and Bad Religion team for helping organize this. It's such a lovely afternoon. Everyone was just so wonderful. And again, Brett's just such a hero to me. I mean, not only creatively and the messages that he writes within his songs, but also his guts and his tenacity and his risk-taking. I mean, there have been several times where he's put that business kind of on the line, and he's built up an incredible company there. It's so admirable, and again, he's just one of those guys who, through his actions, has just really helped shape several generations, and I think for the better. So again, thank you to everyone involved. I'm so humbled to have been able to do this. So that's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide, another episode 500. Don't worry, we've got a couple more coming. And again, I want to remind people we're doing some vinyl giveaways. Go to thevinylguide.com/500. Put your info in there, and I'm giving away some amazing records. You can follow us on Instagram @vinylguide to see what's doing, and we'll be back shortly. So go out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.